Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, as usual. I'm hanging out with this nerd.
I'm Nerdarchy Ted, and that guy over there is Nerdarchy Dave.
Yes, it was a secret
He's
though.
not about to introduce himself.
I was dealing with some tech things where actually, when I realized that I never actually fixed the time on when I scheduled the live stream.
Ah,
So it was basically like for the time that I had, probably like 10 minutes from the time that I actually set it up. So oops,
yeah.
that happens. But anyway, we're live. We're here. Tell your friends. We're doing the thing. So we want to talk about benefits in role-playing games. Fifth edition, recently, last 5 years. But for Dungeons and Dragons, this is the first time it's been a mainstream rule into the game, some kind of benefit. And when we talk about Bennies, like I said, D&D has inspiration where you can get awarded and use it, cash it in and get advantage on a roll. Basically, it's any time that the players actually have say over the game, the mechanics, the narrative, something that they can turn into the GM, and it can change the narrative or the mechanics of the game. So many systems have used it. Cypher System, it's a big part of that game. Fate, Savage Worlds, Mutants and Masterminds. Going back to my earliest role-playing games, Marvel Superheroes used the system. And even there was an add-on rule in 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons for Eberron. They had action points. So, and they can do all kinds of different things depending on the particular system.
And we could really learn a lot from these other systems. And I know some GMs out there do incorporate some of those alternate ideas into how into the inspiration mechanic. By raw, I believe your inspiration is a checkbox. It's not a hash mark. It's like you either have it or you don't. Where we're like, all right, I don't always feel that that's something that's appropriate. I think there's like in our games, we allow you to carry it over. You can have more than one. One is the weird spot, because if you have one, you're going to start off the session with one anyway. But you don't gain one if you've got two. So we kind of have it as a little bit awkward in that regards. But we don't say that you have to choose that you have to choose to use it before you roll. You can see the roll and decide, you know what? No, I'm gonna turn this in. So we stretch it out a little bit more in that regards. But I mean, there's so many other things that these other games do and these other DMs out there are doing.
So my first experience with a system that incorporated benefits into it was Marvel Superheroes, and in the form, it was odd because you would receive and build something called karma, and you would use karma to actually, in essence, level up your character. The only way to improve your character was through karma, but then you could also spend it as a resource to pass rolls, and it was a D100 system. So, if you needed to get 50 and you rolled 45, you could spend karma, and you would be able to, increase that number and get to where you need it. And sometimes it was like really important because sometimes you would spend karma to, change something about your character, do what's called a power stunt, and in essence, use one of the powers you already have in a new way. And you had to do it so many times before it became part of your character. And you needed successes in order to do that. So if you were going to spend the points to do the power stunt, then you kind of wanted to spend the points to make sure you were successful, so that it eventually became a permanent part of your character. And next, go ahead.
I was going to say that is very similar to the way Cypher System works. Is you get you get XP, that you can spend, to level up aspects of your character, and so many level ups gets you up to the next tier, but you can spend that XP to do certain things in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Eberron introduced the idea of action points, and I believe the way they work though in with that system was, I feel like there are certain abilities you could power with your action points, but the standard use,
I could pull out the old campaign book.
yeah, you can actually look it up. But the other way it worked like inspiration for a bard, right? Where you would roll a d6, and you could actually take feats to make it better. So when you did it, you get like a higher die roll and stuff. So and then like I think for us, we wouldn't even touch anything with benefits in it for quite some time. The next time we would was probably Mutants and Masterminds, which had hero points.
So when you spend an action point, add the result of a roll of a d6 to your d20 roll to help you meet or exceed the target number for the roll. So yeah, and then yes, you're absolutely correct. There were feats and abilities that did stack upon it. So it is very similar in a way to what the Bardic Inspiration is in 5th edition.
So you had that, and then Mutants and Masterminds. I remember one of the things you could do with that was like edit the scene, yes. Right? So if you say you wanted to try and trick your opponent into punching a electrical box, you can negotiate with your dungeon master or game master and be like, hey, I have a hero point. Is there an electrical box in this scene? Mm-hmm. And then they would either say yes or no. More than likely they would say yes because you spent the resource for it.
Yeah, in the game that we played this weekend, as well as some other games that I've seen out there, you can use whatever your token, whatever your point is, to say, hey, I don't have this written on my character sheet, but it's something that I could have easily acquired. Can I turn this in, subtract the gold, and just say that I now have this, and I took care of it, before. And I really like that aspect, and it would fit really well in for D&D, whether it's a tool set, whether it's a particular weird item. I like things that give you that moment of, oh well, I'm going to insert a quick flashback of how I got this thing or how I did this, even if it's just a quick mundane thing. But if you really need that, frick, I really wish I had a crowbar, to pry this thing open or help out my ally. So I think that really works. And, if that's a way that you want to use inspiration, I say, why not?
Well, interesting enough, I don't remember I don't know if you remember when we did our review of the Middle Earth game, but there's actually a character class in that game that gets an ability like that, where they actually, so many times per game or per session, they could actually change the narrative, and it's almost like a flashback sequence. Uh-huh. Where you go back and, for instance, like with the crowbar, right. You might go back to why the crowbar is, there, or maybe you get locked up, and you might go back and do a flashback to you having bribed the guard to secret a key away in the cell that you're going to be in.
Uh-huh. So, I mean, there's a lot of fun things that you can do. And I think D&D is a system that can allow that kind of stuff if the group is, able to handle it, and you've got a GM who's willing to, go on the fly with things like
that. Yeah. So you know what, Honey dropped the unicorn. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Sure. But what were you saying, Ted? I'm sorry, I got distracted by the comment.
Oh, I was just saying that, I think D&D has the capability of doing, doing those kinds of things if the group is, confident in and willing to work on the fly, and you have a GM who's willing to, get into that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And, really, it just comes down to, as a group, how much you want to share the narrative. And that's one of the things, like, I find when I've talked to gamers, about using Bennies, they people either love it or they hate it. It rarely does it seem like there's any middle ground. And some of it is like the dungeon master doesn't like sharing the narrative or having the players muck with the narrative for it. Sometimes, and then I think sometimes players, especially with the more narrative-driven Bennies, sometimes certain players don't really want to have to make things up on the fly. They don't feel comfortable doing that. But they're all good examples. I mean, and there's a lot of different ways you can do it, where you cash in something and you get to change a part of the narrative, where you get to do just the reroll, or add in an additional die roll. They're all examples. Now, the different systems we played, like Cypher System, is interesting because the GM decides they will have something that they now want to do, and you, the player, have the ability to say yes or no to it, because he's going to here's 2 XP that I'm going to give to you, and you get to give 1 to someone else and keep 1, but I'm going to do what's called a GM intrusion.
Does that Mutants and Masterminds?
No, that's Cypher System.
Cypher, okay, all right. Sorry.
And there's another instance when that happens as well. I believe, hopefully I'm not screwing up this rule. I'm not by no means a Cypher System expert, but when you have a critical fumble, that means GM intrusion, and you don't get XP for it. Now, I believe if you have XP, you can turn it in and reject it, but if you don't, you have to take the intrusion.
Yes.
So, which is another very interesting way of doing it, because then you get this little back and forth between you, the players, and the GM. Another fun one is the Star Wars RPG. You have the Force and Destiny points, right? Yeah. So in front of you at the beginning, you start with a certain amount of light points, and at any time, a player could be like, you know what, I need a little help. I'm going to use from the pool. And the party can go back and forth and decide whether they think that's a good idea or not. And ultimately, the player can decide anyway. Nope, going to do it anyway, right? And if you do, then they're little tokens with a light side and a dark side. And if you do that, then it gets flipped. So that gives a dark side point
for the GM to be able to use. And I actually really like that system because it is a group dynamic, as opposed to an individual, accounting. And I actually liked it so much that I had proposed I would like to do this for the current D&D game that I was doing, and then we would take away the regular inspiration and replace it with this. And
we shot you down because you put it to a vote.
You guys all were like, no. And I'm like, okay, all right.
We're like, we do not want Ted to have dark side points.
Yeah.
He's evil enough without them.
So Comrade 2261, I love the Star Wars RPG.
Yeah, we don't talk about it too often, in the I would say within the last year or two, but we actually have played quite a few other games, and the reason why we're talking about it tonight is over the weekend, we're going to overlap a little bit with our Patreon live chat that we did last night, but over the weekend, me and Ted flew out to Ohio to hang out on Saturday with GM Scotty, as well as, or DM Scotty, I should say, as well as DMG Info Gareth. And, what we did was play other role-playing games, believe it or not. So 7D System is a game that Gareth has made and has been developing, and Scotty is actually developing his own D6-based game, both of which had benefits in them.
I believe he called it the simple D6 system, because it's really simplistic.
It is very simple.
So we got to try out these games for the first time. I got to put another checkbox, check off another box of another awesome GM run for me. I've actually had the pleasure of being in a DM Scotty game prior to this weekend, but he ran something different this time, which was his own system, and we've really had a lot of fun with both games. Sorry, Gareth, but I like DM Scotty's game better.
What a dick.
Sorry,
I did love the simplicity of the simple D6 system. It was a lot of fun. And I believe both of the games had this one element that I really liked, and that was when you failed, you got a chit, you got a token for failing, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Now the 7D system had actually a lot more opportunities to gain more of those in it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a one shot, so we didn't really get into it, which was nice, and you could use them for different things. Where in the D6 system that Scotty worked on, and came up with. It was a simple 1-for-1. There were every token you had was literally a point that you could just add to your die roll to help get you what you needed. In the 7D system, there was a lot of different things you could use them for. You could change the narrative or add something to the narrative. You could re-roll. You can make the difficulty easier. So there was
if you roll a 2, you could turn that 2 into a success, because in that game, you needed a 1. No matter what die you were rolling, a 1 succeeded. Anything else was a failure. But the 2 was the auto success, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yes, and so in the 7D system, there was a bunch of ways to accumulate these points, and actually, it would translate really well into 5e D&D. I feel like Gareth kind of took from 5e, saw a problem with it, and like flipped it around to make it more useful. So one of the problems with the inspiration system is it's actually supposed to be driven upon the traits for your character. But you've got like 3 or 4 of them, and however many players, that's a lot for the dungeon master to be like, oh, I used your thing, here's inspiration. Well, the 7D system does the same thing, except for it's the player's job to invoke their traits into the narrative. And if you do it in a way that the DM feels like it adds to the story, and a lot of times it's kind of like probably to your detriment, then you get awarded this token. So that part was kind of cool. And also the fact that you could choose, if you failed a roll, you could choose to fail spectacularly, and then you take narrative control to describe how bad it really is, right? And if the GM agrees or tweaks it, you would then get one of these bennies.
So I think it does require a seasoned GM to be like, okay, well, I'm gonna educate and decide whether or not this is really bad enough to count as failing spectacularly. And there were a couple times where like I could see him. He's sitting there, not that the coin was this big, but he's sitting there like, all right, I've got the thing, and it's like, all right, give me more, and it's like, oh my god, this is bad. And then once it's like, all right, well, if I add this, then I think it counts, and I'm like, oh god. And he would just toss the chip across the table. I think it's a lot of fun. When you get into one-shots, I don't feel as bad about, well, I'm just going to fail spectacularly here and come up with this ridiculous story. When I jumped out of the helicopter, it's like, oh, well, this is what's going to happen. And I wound up hitting my head, catching my ankle, falling back into the helicopter that then crashed with me still in it. I don't know how I survived that, but whatever.
Well, you survived because you were ejected from the helicopter before it exploded.
Oh, that's right.
We all just thought you were dead.
But you, the alien, was still willing to come look for me.
Yeah, so I almost did get dead for that. So it just adds like this extra element to the game where you can interact back and forth with the GM to kind of like muck with the story, and for better or worse, right? It doesn't always have to be, you're looking for advantages as the player, because like some of the instances we just described, the systems actually reward you for bad things happening, and and just because bad things happen they don't have to be final or fatal, but it does help if they're interesting, because it just creates moments in the story that people are going to remember and talk about. So, I think I wouldn't mind for our own games if we took the inspiration mechanic and the traits mechanics and allowed the players to invoke them instead of the DM relying on it. And for the players to think about how using their traits would affect the game and their role play.
Okay, I can definitely see that coming in and being a little bit more apropos. Just like with the 7D system, where it's up to the player to say, hey, this is bringing this aspect into the game. Will that count? Yeah, I would definitely see that, because I like the idea of players getting inspiration for more than just oh, that was a really cool description, or that was a really funny joke, because that tends to be what I do. I think we've talked about in the past too of
making magic items and powering them with either hit dice or inspiration or both.
Yes.
Is something that we've considered doing for sure. I mean, we have our heroics, the hit dice, where we saw the hit dice mechanic as being like a cool thing that could probably have more uses, and we incorporated that into a product. But we've also thought, well, inspiration could have a lot more cool things that you could do with it. Yeah, you could even have feats that are kind of based off of inspiration as well, where they do better things than normal feats, but it's limited to how much inspiration do you have to pump into them.
Now you got my brain a whirling, dude.
and if you think about it, most games start off with at least one inspiration, so you'd be able to use it at least once.
Right.
So it wouldn't be terrible. So it'd have to be good enough that, like, yes, this is something I would definitely want to use once per adventure.
Mm.
So there was a question earlier, and I'll address it real quick.
Nerdarchy, you and other D&D channels won't be affected by the change that might happen next year. I'm really concerned for the D&D YouTube channels by Honey Drop the Unicorn. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. So I don't actually think, like, our content, I don't consider our content child friendly or appealing to children. I mean, it's a couple old guys talking about D&D. We're not really aimed at it. We use fantasy art in our thumbnails, and even lately it's been more us than anything. Like, so none of that really is an issue. I'm actually more concerned for my friends in the D&D community that are making animated videos, because I could see how that might be misconstrued or construed as being, appealing to children.
Right. And those kind of videos, video game, or video game play, like, those are things that if, a kid might be playing that game, that's going to be, an attractor. So I don't think we're going to really be affected, but, we really have no idea, how YouTube is going to handle it. No idea what it's going to mean for the channel. We're just going to have to sit back and, wait and see.
Yeah, like, so the biggest thing, too, is that they'll change the way advertising works on your channel. So your advertising would go down. You would take a hit, and it was like a pretty big hit. I think it was like 60 to 70%. If you're on your monetization, if it got moved to the other thing or whatever. But, if you're worried, we have a Patreon, so you can help us out there. But no, so we'll see what happens. We're going to keep on keeping on, as we always do. Remember, if you have questions, just tag us Nerdarchy so we can see it, or GM911, and we are more than happy to take any questions you have, or explore any topics you want to explore within reason.
Just a couple interesting comments. Aaron the Pedantic, Dave, Ted, we love you guys. I love seeing the enthusiasm from our fans and viewers. It's cool.
Absolutely, and I also wonder if Aaron is not a hive mind, because he did use the plural we. So
that's okay. Maybe he's got a couple voices living in his head. There's nothing wrong.
And
with
they
that.
all love us. Yeah.
Or maybe he and some friends are sitting there watching the live chat all together, and he was the one sitting in front of the computer to type. You never know.
That's true. You do never know.
So there is another comment from Honeydrop the Unicorn. Are you able to do a video on the Wizard School of Reconstruction from Xanathar's Lost Notes to everything else? Is that a drive-through, or is that...
that is a DM's Guild.
Okay. Well, we tend to not go off main.
Yeah, we do try and stay more or less to the official stuff. Occasionally, we have ventured elsewhere. Cristiano wants to know, and I'm probably butchering your name, I'm sorry. When is the next Kickstarter, and about what topic? Well,
I don't believe we're quite ready to reveal that yet, are we?
No. That what you could know. Well, I guess we could say the topic is probably gonna be more player centric.
Okay.
It probably, unless something crazy happens with Wizards of the Coast, it will probably be a D&D product. And as to when we reveal it, it will be sometime after we deliver on the Kickstarter we just did, and before the end of Nerdarchy the convention. I can with certainty say that. We definitely don't want to be thinking too far ahead because we want to get the book we just kicked in your hands. And by the way, if you haven't pledged, you can pledge late and pre-order and get the same great Kickstarter prices.
Oh. Cameron's comment.
Yes. Thanks for saying it's okay to have voices in your head so casually, Ted. Ted, my therapist may disagree with you. I'm not sure.
There's probably several voices up in here, talking about one thing or another. So,
Yeah. So, we've also been asked if we'd ever make like our own role-playing game. So if we do, I'm pretty certain we would put some kind of benefit, Benny system in there.
I would say so, yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot of success with all the different systems that are using it, and we would draw, as we do with everything, we draw inspiration from where we've already seen and the things that we like, and it would just be, well, how exactly is it that we're going to do? Are we going to do something that's more like Star Wars? Are we going to do something more like the 7D system? Would we follow D&D? There's a lot of different aspects that could be used. I would strongly go against the ideas of the Cypher system where it's both XP and Benny at the same time. I personally am not a big fan of that, but it's also a very, very small chance that we would decide to create our own system as it is.
You never know. We may get inspired. Well, that is kind of a weird question because, I feel the same way you do. It's like the chances of us creating our own thing is slim. And then I see what Scotty came up with. I'm like, that is really cool. I wish we'd had more time to talk about like how he came up with it and what the premise was.
Well, I mean, we could always invite him in for one of these live chats and talk about it.
Yeah, that would absolutely be cool. But that's what I'm saying. Like, for me, like I would never want to make a system just to make one. Like, if I'm going to do something, I'm probably trying to solve a problem or a problem that I perceive.
Mm-hmm.
But I would love to hear his thoughts on it more. Honey dropped the unicorn. Any idea who hacked your Facebook page? Probably aliens.
Aliens, huh?
It's my theory. I'm sticking to it. Nah, we'll never know. Some Russian bot, maybe. Who knows?
I'm glad to have it back.
Yes.
Lose all those Facebook fans.
Woo! We're still kicking. Oh, so you've kind of stated like the system that you don't like, as far as Bennies go. Do you have one? Do you do like?
I think I said it, kind of plainly. I like the idea of, the Genesis RPG and the Star Wars RPG where it's a group dynamic. And, while the individual player can say, I'm going to do this, and you can enter into that moment of, look, guys, no, there's already way too many dark points. The only way that, we're going to get any back, especially when you're talking about that last flip, is for the DM to start using them against us. So I think that's kind of cool because it does add just that little bit extra tension to the game when you get to that last one and it's like, all right, it's that crunch moment or clutch moment of like, oh my God, we really need to succeed here, but is it worth flipping that one thing over?
So
dig that.
So for anyone that's not familiar with the Star Wars system, in the beginning of the session, everyone rolls their light and dark side dice, right? Which are specific dice, and they have pips on it that are either light side or dark side.
Well, no, you roll one die, and you have a chance of rolling a blank, a 1, or a 2. And it's either a light or a dark, depending upon what's there. So like you could wind up rolling, 2 light, 2 dark, 1 light, 1 dark, or nothing. And it's a D12, and all of those things are options, and you add up what everybody rolled, and that's what it starts with. So I've seen games where just about everybody rolled dark side points. So that forces the GM of like, okay, well, I've got to begin using these things so that you guys have a pool. So he hits you hard in the beginning of the session, whereas, if you roll mostly light, then it becomes, all right, well, we can choose to not spend them, or, you have a very easy start of the game and a potentially hard end of the session. If, if you're going back and forth with them, it depends upon, what it is that, is going to happen. So I think there's a lot of fun there that, the number of points becomes, random. The swing of it, who's got the high, who's got the low, where's the middle, is random as well. So I think that aspect is intriguing. I think that there's a draw to me as a GM to have that randomness there and be able to have fun with it.
We recently got to play with it a lot more when we were playing. We did, well, I say recently, but it's not that recent because we did 2 seasons of Marvel Phase Rip on the channel.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it's funny because as I was thinking and talking about it, Doug has actually just put that in the chat. And that just made me think of that game as being so far ahead of its time, because when it came out, it was fairly early into RPGs, and I want to say it was like the first one to introduce that kind of mechanic where you were able to spend and change the story from a resource.
Right.
I mean, and then also it was really hard to advance in that game, and you were spending the thing that helped you advance. So, I don't know. It's kind of cool. Like you said, I'm not sure if I'd want to lean on XP and make that, or the way you advance your character, the same thing that you would use for the Benny system.
So do you have a favorite, Benny system, or any of that kind of stuff?
I think I'm kind of partial. I do like the individual where you get to do it, and you have, narrative gives you options, right? That's what I think I like. I like systems that have multiple options, whether it's like, oh, you can affect the game mechanically, or you can affect the game narratively. I think they're both kind of fun.
So, looking after the, the ideas of what we saw this weekend, I'm very much considering, and you'll probably see some thoughts, in the newsletter when it comes out next, for incorporating some of those ideas of like, all right, how do you feel, Dave, about having, if you roll a 1, okay, nothing drastic happens automatically, but you have those GMs out there who are like, oh, this happens or that happens. What do you think about taking, that fails spectacularly when you roll a 1 to get a Benny, if there were more, if there were other things besides just rolling with advantage in the Benny?
I like it. I like the idea that the onus is on the player as to what's going to happen, if something's going to happen at all. Mm-hmm. Like they can decide, you know what, I want to have that resource later, so I'm willing to have something bad happen now, whether it's damage to myself, be is in a precarious position where maybe the next round of attacks have advantage on you, or maybe you're going to have disadvantage in the next round, but narratively describe what happens, and then you or you with the GM kind of come up with the mechanical penalties for that, and then you get that. Yes, I actually like that, and I'm not sure that I've seen that anywhere else. I'm not saying it isn't anywhere else, but I don't think I've seen it where it's an option for you to choose to have something bad happen and then be rewarded with that with some kind of benefit.
Besides the 7D system.
Besides the 7D system, yes.
So I think I'm gonna begin I'm gonna percolate and see how that goes, and throw that out there once I've got some solid thought patterns. Uh, to be able to say that this is what I want to do. But in order for that to happen, like it's not worth just the I get advantage on my next roll. I want to think of what are some counterpoints to that, so that you've got extra ideas and extra things that you could do to spend your inspiration. And I feel that if you've got this weight negative thing that could happen to you, there's got to be that other side of something really good can happen, with your regular inspiration.
It's a lot harder in a game like Dungeons and Dragons because it's so crunchy and already has so many options in it.
Mm-hmm.
In a really rules light game, it's a lot easier because
Right.
you could literally be like, "Oh, I'm gonna make up a rule for the benefit system where I overcharge an ability," right?
Mm-hmm.
And because things usually were pretty simplistic, it would be a lot easier to come up with what that means.
Right.
But in a game like D&D, because the rule set is so vast and would cover so much ground, depending on the characters that are involved,
Right.
it's a lot harder.
So, like, when you're talking about 7D system or even simple D6, where like your standard attack does 1 point of damage, period, getting another point, is pretty cool to be able to turn in a Benny if you want to, succeed spectacularly, or, can, turn that, regular hit into a crit for the chance of having it do more damage. Those kinds of things wind up being fun. Um, but in a game like D&D where, damage can be through the roof. I mean, both you and I have seen triple digit damage from a single attack before. So it does have that serious, problem of, well, you can't just, going to add an extra multiplier for all of your dice. And, no, that's not really, a thing that D&D could really handle.
So, I mean, you've already kind of stated the system that you like is the Star Wars system,
Mm-hmm.
where basically it also becomes a weapon to use against. You can weaponize it to use against your players.
Right.
So clearly, you're for the GM being able to invoke as well. The Cypher system does that via intrusions to a certain extent. Where let me make something bad happen, and here's the carrot for it for you and a friend, or you crit fumble so you can buy me off, or it's just going to happen if you can't afford to bribe me. I don't know. So I'm not sure how I feel about it. So, which kind of leads me to Michael's question: what if you allowed your players to award your NPCs for those benefits? Like, if you really dig how you're role playing the NPC as the DM, they can award you points to use to negate player actions. So, here's my thoughts on that. I kind of don't, as the GM, I don't feel like I need to be rewarded for role playing the character, the NPC well. To me, the reward would be how the players interact with that character. Like, it would be more narrative and story driven and role playing driven than mechanical.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't think that as the GM that there should be any kind of control like that issued by the players. I've sadly known too many games or too many players where we're like, no, I don't care how good the DM is. I'm not giving them things to, negate my actions. That's just crazy talk. So while it's a great idea with veteran gamers who understand a give and take and ebb and flow of the game. Oh, well, if you don't give me stuff, I've got no incentive to give you. Um, it's an interesting idea, and some groups I think are able to handle something like that. I just think that I've met too many people who would be against something like that. Dave, are you still there?
No, I'm reading a comment.
Oh, okay.
So, all right. So Michael's follow-up. What if the idea is to allow enjoyable NPC to avoid dying For example, allowing the DM to be like, nope, you didn't chop off his head. Here is what happened, and then the fate token is given over to you. So like you could kind of do that. Like the light and dark side points kind of work that way, where since it's a pool, anyone can use them. And if the DM has dark points available to him, then you would use it in that way. Although that system doesn't, I don't think that system allows for quite that much narrative control. It's usually like extra dice or something. But that being said, any Bennies system, you could do that if you decide to incorporate it. Which I do like. I do like the narrative control parts, but I don't feel like the GM really needs that. Right? Because you're the GM. Like, literally, you already have all the narrative control. So I feel like that's a benefit that helps the players a lot more. Because as the GM, yes, we could do a thing and you can chop off my NPC's head. But as a dungeon master, I could bring that NPC back somehow if I wanted to.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't actually have to even explain it, right? As I feel like some DMs agonize over having to explain everything and figure out by the rules how they've done this thing. But as the dungeon master, I play by different rules. So if I'm doing something for a narrative or story reason, what it was a clone or it was a sacrilocrum. What is it?
Simulacrum.
That thing, or whatever it was, or a dark deity brought that character back to life, that NPC back to life. So you just don't need it as the GM. You already kind of have all the narrative control.
When you are sitting in that GM seat, and sadly something goes awry, and like, oh damn it, I wanted to use this and I wanted to do that. You legitimately have more power than the gods in your world to do as you will. But I have to look at it at times of, okay, well, did this happen for a reason? Did I slip up as a GM and reveal too much about where this story was going to go, and the players acted upon it? Did the players just do something foolish and kill some random person that they didn't really have just cause for? There are so many different ways that you could twist and bend that story. Okay, well, now that person that he killed, well, you don't have to bring him back to life. Were you, if you're planning to use him, does that person have a twin? Does that person have a brother? Does that person have a sister? A father? Like, you could take it and be like, okay, well, now the story is going in this direction. You don't always have to bend and twist to make things happen the way you exactly want. Sometimes it's, well, the story went in this direction. I wasn't expecting it. How can I still tell the tale that I want without that character? If you don't think you can, well, then you can go down the road and say, all right, as Dave says, that person took a warlock pact. They were resurrected by a dark god. They were inhabited by, some other, creature spirit while they were dead, and now they're doing, something else, or, continuing along the path of dark magic that they were really, looking for. Maybe, there was already something in that character, in that NPC, that has given them power. And, oh, yeah, they're dead. Their head was chopped off. But you know what? The second that, the characters are out of view, the blood kind of pulls its way out of the body, reaches over, grabs the head, drags it back to the body, and you can, begin to see the skin knitting itself back together. And as soon as that's done, the character stands up and walks away. Can explain everything. You can totally do the James Bond villain thing and give that flashback moment and explain as much as you want, or leave it to be a mystery that the players might never figure out. That's one of the things that I think is awesome about D&D is you legitimately have so much control that you can do whatever you want with it. So when the players shove a wrench into your plans, either run with it and see where the story goes and, adjust on the fly as need be, or say, oh well, I'm sticking with my plans, and I just need to go around this little hiccup and get back on track.
I think, like, for one, like Noah Atweiler, Counter Monkey, like one of his sayings is one of my favorites, and that is when the players question your ruling as to why something worked a certain way, or why, or how it's not supposed to work that way. His response is usually, "Yeah, isn't that interesting?" And there's power in not explaining things and not figuring it out, because sometimes a solution will present itself that's way better if you just let the narrative continue with that mystery. Because one, hindsight is 20/20, so the more time you let go by, the more chances are that you're going to be able to come up with a cool solution as to why that happened, and that's going to add to the story. And also too, like, when I say as the GM, you can kind of do what you want, I mean from a narrative story standpoint, you shouldn't just be dicking around with things just because you're trying to beat the players. You should legitimately be trying to add to the story that's going on.
I 100% agree with that statement, Dave. And with what you said, there's another caveat to that is the power of silence can be amazing, and it can actually give you things that you had not thought of. So when you say, "Oh, isn't that interesting?" and then stop talking, the players might say, "Oh, well, I wonder if this happened, or I wonder if that happened," and legitimately, they might give you a cool idea that you hadn't thought of. That's like, "Oh, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense," or "Oh, I that's what it is now." The number of times that I've had players, offer a throwaway comment of whether they're talking player to player or character to character that has become canon in my world, or in my material. It's ridiculous. I haven't kept the list, but I mean, it's happened in recent months where someone said something and I'm like, "Oh, yep, absolutely, that's true," and my material just got changed at that moment. And it's fantastic when you can do that kind of stuff. And that player then thinks this great thing. I figured it out. And then you as the GM, because you like their idea better than yours, you run with it, so everybody wins.
Often things will be said at the table like, "Shh, stop talking, the DM is listening." Because frankly, some of the best ideas come from there. I will not be able to answer this, but Ted has at least a little bit of experience. So Kenny wants to know, what's your favorite... actually, I think maybe it wasn't Kenny. I thought someone asked about the favorite Star Wars system.
What's your favorite Star Wars universe for role-playing game? Our favorite planet in the Star Wars universe?
There was one before that. Which system? Because I know you've played multiple systems. I've only played the most recent one. Oh, it was Corey. They asked about the D20 and West End. Is the West End the one you played, the D6s?
I played the D6 Star Wars, yes. I played a Jawa who left Tatooine. I don't know. I think the D6 system was a little bit simpler, and we're talking about going back more than 20 years at this point in time. So forgive me if my recollection of that system is not crystal clear. I believe system was easier to function and to do. Having played so many, and I've got a shelf full of Star Wars books down below me here. I have zero problem with the new Star Wars system. I enjoy the way it's laid out, but it is very what's the word I'm looking for?
It's very crunchy with narrative dice on top of it.
I would say it's a little off-putting to new players to have to learn all of those symbols, what counteracts what. And once you've got that, and you can then sift through your pool and figure out, okay, I have this many successes, this many advantages, this many failures, this many disadvantages, or whatever it's called, getting that all fluffed out to know that, oh, well, I succeed, but, I've got one disadvantage. All right, well, all right, how does that look? I think that is a little bit harder to deal with over the simple D20 of, well, it is a absolute success or an absolute failure that D&D presents. I like the gradation. I like the fact that you can, kind of extrapolate those extra scenarios out of it. But, triumphs and despairs can change things. They don't cancel. So that amount of stuff, the more dice you roll, the more wild swing possibilities that you have. And I think that can be daunting for both player and GM that are new to it. So I think because of that, I think I would have to vote on D6.
D6. So Kenny was the one that asked about your favorite planet. I am not. I'm a bad Star Wars nerd, to be honest with you. I do not have that much Star Wars knowledge.
So I mean, I could give you a very cheesy answer that's very pop culture at the moment and say Mandalore. But I will go further and say that I don't know enough planets off the top of my head. I could tell you different races that I really enjoy. I could tell you different characters that are not part of the main script that I thought had really interesting stories or looked really cool. But I don't know enough about Star Wars, despite having several books down here of essential guides. Let's see here.
Well, for me, I want to say the most
Essential
fun.
Guide to Alien Species, Essential Guide to Characters, the Essential Chronology, the new Essential Guide to Characters. There's a lot of Star Wars stuff that I've read and consumed over the years. But
so I want to say the fun part about playing Star Wars for me was like going to all the different places.
mm-hmm.
So like I wouldn't really want to play Star Wars and just be like on one planet.
Right.
Like to me the fun part was the ship, right? The ship was kind of like our base of operation and it was the constant. And then we would take that and go to the different places. So that's what I liked. So I wouldn't even if I knew more, I don't think I would be able to pick a planet. Be like, yep, I just want to play on this one. Maybe Cloud City, right? Don't they have hookers and jet blackjack there?
They do have those kinds of things there, depending upon who's currently controlling it. If you're talking about pre Empire, then Lando is still there, so it's not under Empire control. But there's a lot of great stuff that's there. Kenny says he likes Tatooine. No, I'm not going to do an impression of an Ithorian, Cameron. I don't have the ability to kind of groan out the, my double mouthed on my, massive neck. I know what you're talking about.
You might need a didgeridoo to make that sound. I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm a dork. I do know, a lot of those different races and things. I actually made a.
I'm a dork too. I just have a terrible memory.
But I don't think you've read through all of those books that I had just kind of.
No, I have not. I've only seen the movies and like maybe some of the animated stuff.
So you haven't read the handful of books that I have and what have you, but I think Kashyyyk would be, a pretty fun planet to play on. But I would agree with you, Dave, that, anytime you're talking about a Star Wars, Star Trek, Spelljammer, like the idea is you are going to spend more time in space than you are going to be in any one location. And if you aren't, it's not really, the space opera. It's not the space game that you're expecting it to be. I think Firefly sold it right when they put it together, that Serenity was their home, and they wanted you to feel that while watching that all of those characters were comfortable and were set in that location, and they had to kind of put on more of a facade when they were off ship, because that's when that's when their life was more in danger. That's when they had to be doing the job. And I watched all of the behind the scenes stuff on Firefly, and it was like, yeah, that totally makes sense. It's a lot of fun, and I think all of that needs to hold true anytime you're playing a space game.
So, all that being said, right? You could take the Star Wars stuff and just run it in Cypher to reduce some of the complexity. Although you'd have to run like you'd have to run the super system from Cyphers with your Jedi to give them their better Jedi powers. Which would be really ugly next to the rest of the characters.
Yes, and that goes to exactly with what going back to Counter Monkey, what he said. You need to either all be Jedi or no Jedi.
Yeah, the Jedi are like my least favorite part of the Star Wars universe.
Well, I mean and that's why you can't, as the Ghostbusters say, cross the streams.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, he outthunk all of them in one D&D or one Star Wars because he was the only one that wasn't a Jedi, and he still shut them all down. Still a fun and amusing video. But I mean, I think any game that allows characters to be on vastly different power scales has an inherent flaw, and some games are like, but that's the fun part, and I'm like, I disagree. And we had the one superheroes game where you were some karate monk dude and I was a dude who could change into living plasma, and
they're almost the same thing.
It's like, all right,
it's like playing the Punisher next to Thor.
I don't know. I mean, I don't even think it was that. I think it was a bigger scale than that. Like, legitimately, there was nothing your character could have done to mine if I was on fire. And you would just get hurt trying.
Well, I assure you, there's nothing that the Punisher can do to Thor.
And I mean, that was what led us to go down the path that led us to Mutants and Masterminds.
It is true. I mean, you still have those characters with the discrepancies, but for the most part, it's how they're built.
And right, but like the
it's not as swingy.
It's not as swingy
or random.
And you've all got the same amount of points, and it's how you decide to build them. And if you decide to be like, okay, well, I'm going to be, Jack Norm, who's got, all of this knowledge. Okay, well, great. Your character can still die pretty easily because you didn't put any points into those things. But that was a choice as opposed to a system limitation.
So it looks like we got like one last question that I don't know that we're going to be able to answer this one in the time left from Cristiano. How is the broad concept of fueling with Bennies for magic items?
So the simple question would be, you would have to have a system that is designed to be able to, have you earn them faster than what D&D currently does. So if I were to create a magic item that is fueled by your Bennies, by your inspiration, if I'm using it for D&D, there would need to be something that the magic item gives you that, it gives you a way to earn it. Whether it be, you complete a certain action, whether you roll a certain thing on a die, whatever have you. I'd have to, when I'm designing a magic item, I would come up with those things, but there would have to be a give and take. Like the item has to present you with the ability to earn them faster so that it can consume them. And it might consume them faster than you are earning them, but it has to give you that extra advantage. So I do like the idea, and as Dave brought it up, my mind.
So my thoughts
has been spinning.
My thoughts is it's just like a regular magic item, like it has some qualities or traits that are useful all the time. But then when you pump it with your inspiration, you overcharge it and it does something cool.
Yeah.
Who knows? It could be anything. We had some more questions, but it's that time, so just come back next week and ask them again. And we will be here. We talked about what bennies are in the beginning, and that's just like inspiration from D&D, where you get to affect the game mechanically. But there's a lot of different systems that use them. As always, we appreciate all you folks hanging out with us. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.